Hi everyone, welcome to week 11 of ENS 5520. This is our final week of content and we're focusing on a critical and often underdeveloped aspect of behavioral science, ethics. Across this unit, you've learned to define your problems and identify behaviors and diagnose drivers and design interventions and evaluate them. But this week asks a different kind of question. Not just can you change behavior and how, but should you? And if you are, how do you do it responsibly? Behavioral science gives us tools to shape environments and influence decisions and ultimately change what people do. But that power creates an ethical responsibility because every intervention involves choices, right? Whose behavior are we trying to change? What outcomes are we prioritizing? Who benefits or potentially loses out? Importantly, ethics is not just about avoiding harm. It's about ensuring that our work is also fair, transparent, and aligned with the well-being of the people that we're affecting. Crucially, relying on common sense or our intuition is not enough. What feels acceptable to us is shaped by social norms, and history shows us that these norms can be deeply flawed. Acceptability also varies drastically from person to person. So, ethical practice requires structured reflection, not just instinct or our general values. Ethical considerations arise at several stages of the behaviour works method. We can group some of the main ones into 3 key decision points. The first is what problems do we work on? The second is who and what do we target? And the third is how do we intervene? Let's briefly unpack each of these. Not all problems are equally important, and not all are equally ethical to prioritise. We often face constraints like time, funding, and organisational priorities, but ethics asks a deeper question. Are we working on the problems that create the most good? Some useful questions to ask yourself here are around impact. How much difference would solving this problem make? Neglectedness, is this problem being overlooked? And solvability, can meaningful progress be made here? This pushes us to think beyond the usual things around convenience and visibility and gets us to think more around responsible prioritization. The next ethical question is, who are we trying to influence and what exactly are we asking them to do? In practice, we often target groups that are easiest to reach, but this can create inequities. Some groups may be over-targeted or underserved or excluded entirely. For example, digital interventions may increase efficiency, but exclude those who don't have access to technology. There are also ethical questions about the behaviours themselves. Some behaviours have unintended consequences, they affect other groups of people, or they sit within very sensitive cultural or moral domains. So we have to ask ourselves, is it appropriate for us to intervene here at all? Finally, we consider how we change behaviour. This is where ethical concerns are often most visible, especially with approaches like nudging. Nudges work by shaping the choice architecture around people, right? They influence decisions without necessarily removing options. But it raises some important concerns. Are we manipulating people? Are we being transparent? Are we respecting autonomy? This is where we need some structured frameworks. One of the most useful contemporary frameworks for ethical behaviour change is called For Good. It was developed to translate fairly complex philosophical debates about nudges into a practical tool for practitioners. Now, like I said, a nudge is a type of intervention that kind of gently directs people towards making certain choices by altering the environment, by altering the choice architecture. While Nudge for Good was originally intended for nudges, the principles in the frameworks can absolutely be applied to all behavioural interventions. For Good stands for fairness, openness, respect, goals, opinions, options, and delegation. Let's walk through each principle. So, fairness. Does the intervention place an unfair burden on certain groups? For example, are there vulnerable populations that are disproportionately targeted or impacted? Openness. Is the intervention transparent, or is it hidden, subtle, or difficult for people to detect? Ethical practice generally favours transparency over manipulation. Respect. Does the intervention respect people's autonomy, their dignity, their freedom of choice? Even when we're influencing behaviour, individuals should still retain meaningful agency. Goals. Are the goals of the intervention genuinely aligned with people's well-being, or do they primarily serve institutional or organisational interests? Opinions. Would the target audience support the intervention if they were fully informed? This introduces the idea of democratic legitimacy and social license. Options. Are there alternative ways that we could achieve the same outcome? For example, would regulation, education, or structural change be more appropriate than something like a nudge or another intervention? Delegation. Do we have the right to intervene in this context? Who has authorised our influence, and are they accountable? The key strength of For Good is that it recognises that ethics is not a checklist. In reality, it's often a set of trade-offs that we're making. The framework helps us to surface ethical tensions and ask better questions of ourselves and our stakeholders, as well as make decisions more transparently. It also reflects a bit of a broader shift in behavioural science. As the field grows, there's this increasing recognition that ethical practice isn't optional. It's central to credibility and trust and meaningful impact. So, as we wrap up this unit, I want to leave you with a few key questions to carry forward into your work. When you're designing behaviour change interventions, ask yourself, what problems am I choosing to work on and why? Who am I working with? And are those partnerships aligned with the outcomes that I'm trying to achieve? Who am I targeting, and who might be excluded or disproportionately affected? What behaviours am I trying to change, and what might the unintended consequences be? How am I intervening, and is this approach fair, transparent, and respectful? Would the people affected by this intervention support it fully if they understood it? These are the kind of questions that frameworks like For Good are designed to help you think through. Behavioural scientists should be relying on structured ethical decision-making throughout the entire behavioural science process. The key message from this week is that behavioural science is not just about changing behaviour, it's also about changing behaviour responsibly. Ultimately, the goal is to design effective interventions that are also justifiable, equitable, and trustworthy. Thank you for all of your hard work across the unit, and I wish you all of the very best for your final submissions.